there, this is Wade from VRF Education channel. Today we're going to learn how to use CSS Grid in our web page styles. CSS Grid brings a lot of flexibility for developers, and we use a Grid and Flexbox to create responsive web pages. And if you get familiar with these two layout systems, you can create HTML dashboard using CSS much more easily. I talked about CSS Flexbox in the previous session, and today we're going to learn different aspects of CSS Grid and how we can deal with this layout system. There's a lot of things, and this video will be a lengthy video, but I'm going to tell you everything about CSS Grid, the most important ones. First of all, we check some background data and some theoretical things, and then we go directly to VS Code and start checking CSS Grid in practice. I hope you enjoyed this video. First of all, let's check some background data and also get familiar with some terminology in grid layout, and then we go to VS Code and start using grid layout in practice. Grid layout is a two-dimensional layout system. By using layout in general, we tell the browser how to render our elements, our HTML elements, on the screen. We have come a long way so far. We used to use HTML tables in order to lay out our web pages, for example 20 years ago, and nowadays no one uses HTML tables. Although it works, but it brought us a lot of problems and complexities. Then we changed the way we lay out our web pages. We use CSS techniques such as floats, positioning, include, relative, and absolute or even static positioning, and inline blocks also, and stuff like that. Although all of these techniques are very useful and handy, but when it comes to use them for build a complex layout or complex web pages, they all suffered from lack of flexibility. You cannot build a complex UI using these techniques alone. So CSS provides us two other layouts, Flexbox and Grid. If you are working with HTML and CSS, you may have heard a lot about Flexbox and Grid. These are two most popular layout systems used in web design nowadays. I've already talked about Flexbox in detail in another video on my YouTube channel. I will add the address to the description of this video. You can check it if you want to get familiar with Flexbox. Flexbox is a very popular layout system and used widely in web page designs, especially when we want to create some HTML dashboard, dynamic HTML dashboards. This layout used widely, and I will upload a video about how to create a dashboard using HTML and CSS very soon, and you can see that I use Flexbox a lot. But the main drawbacks with Flexbox is that this technique is used to lay out elements in one direction, even row or column based. And that's the main drawbacks of Flexbox. When we want to create a complex UI template or UI layouts, Flexbox is not the best solution. Here we can use grid layout. With grid layouts, you can assume the web page as Excel sheet. There are lots of cells stick together, and you have a spreadsheet like pages, and you can add HTML elements into one of those cells. You can combine those cells to create some areas and assign or allocate much more space to specified elements. We'll talk about all of them in detail very soon. But in order to use a grid layout, you need to follow these three steps at minimum. At first, you should create a container element and with the grid value for display attributes. And then you can define the column and the rows of that grid using these two attributes, grid template columns and grid template rows. And then you can just allocate a space or allocate cells to child elements of that container using grid column and grid rows. And there are lots of other attributes we're gonna check in practice very soon. This is three steps we should follow at minimum to get a grid layout in our HTML pages. Let's get familiar with some terminology in grid layout. First one is a grid line. All lines in grid can have a name to be referred in future. This is somehow strange, but we will check it very soon. The next one is grid cell. Grid cell is a space between two adjacent row and two adjacent columns or grid lines. This is a cell, this is a cell, this is a cell, and all of them are individual cells. Grid track is a space between two adjacent grid lines. You can think of them as the columns and rows of the grid. Here is the grid track between the second and third row grid lines. Okay, this is the grid track. And the next one is grid area, the total space around by 4 grid lines. A grid area may be composed of any number of grid cells. Here's a grid area between the row grid lines 1 and 3 and columns grid lines 1 and 3. This is the grid area. And before we get to check grid in practice, I should mention that all the content of this video inspired from an article wrote in this URL address from the CSS-Tricks site. That's a very useful article. You can read it for more information if you want, and there are lots of resources in that article. And that's very good to be a master of grid layout system in CSS. Let's just tell you something about the environment that I'm going to use throughout this course, and then start our journey in grid layout. I use a VS Code as the text editor, but you can use any text editor that you are comfortable with. If you use VS Code, there are a couple of extensions that can help you. There are a lot of them here, but HTML boilerplate, HTML CSS support, I installed them, and they're very useful and good. HTML snippets, it seems that it's somehow deprecated. I don't care about it. And also live server, pre-tier, and preview on web server. The last one will provide us a utility to see our output in a panel inside the VS Code. If you right-click in the HTML file and go down, you can see these two options, preview server, launch on a web browser, or preview on the side panel. If I choose preview on side panel, a panel opened here, and I can see the result of changes in both files directly here. And you can see it in the web browser, but because I don't want to switch from VS Code to Chrome, I choose to see the result here. And I added two files, index.html and style.css. All things will happen in these two files. So I just close the Explorer section in order to have much more space to code. Now if I type exclamation mark, some abbreviation appear here, and it said if you press enter, I will create this boilerplate for you. Now I can change the title, for example, to grid layout. It's not important because I'm going to use a preview and here. Now I'm going to declare some a container and some inner HTML for our example. So for container, I use a div element with a container class. To create it using those extensions that I've installed, you can just enter dot and your class name. As you can see, this abbreviation is for div. You don't need to specify div element explicitly. It's implicit. Now I used container as the class. As you can see, if I press enter, this snippet will be replaced with this element with the class of container. But what if I want a paragraph tag with the class container? I should explicitly specify the element p dot, for example, sample class. Now if I press enter, the p element or p tag created with that specified class for me. Now I want 6 inner HTML, and I will use div also for my inner elements. So I want one div or dot specified div for me with the class of item. Now I'm gonna duplicate it for 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this is my base structure. So I think something went wrong. Let's open the preview pane one more time. Okay, this is some block level divs, and I want to add some classes to them. So first one is .container class, and the other one .item class. For items, I just want to use background to green for right, and .item class. So what's down? And also for container, I just want to change the display attribute to grid, but this is not enough. And also change the background to red. Oh, I forgot to add the CSS file to our HTML file. Yeah, this is true. The name is style. Okay. As you can see, there are block level divs. So when we change the display to grid, we should define how many columns or even how many rows we have. And there are lots of ways to do this. First of all, you can use a property or attribute named grid template columns. And here there are a couple of ways to tell the browser how many columns you should create for this grid. First, we can use some size for our columns directly. For example, I want my first column to be 30 pixel, the other one 50 pixel, and the other one 80 pixel. If I saved it, nothing gonna happen. Why? Let's reload preview pane one more time. Nothing happened. Everything just goes fine. Display grid template to that one, and this is also the class container. So what's the problem? Display grid template column. So let's copy this one and just paste. Okay, here we just miss a spell, I think. Now you can see I have a grid with 2 rows and 3 columns. I just declare the columns, but as you can see, I have 6 elements inside the container, so that causes 2 rows for me. Now I can, as you can see, these values are static, 30, 50, and 80 pixels. I can use a keyword here, auto. Using auto, I declare 3 columns with auto keywords. This will create 3 columns that they have the same size, because the browser gonna divide the available space by 3 and assign it to each column. So if I saved it, you can see there are 3 different columns. If I just grow and shrink the page, the size of columns will automatically change because of these keywords. So I can use these 2 in combination. For example, let's also add a gap. I will talk about gap very soon. 10 pixels for both rows and columns. As you can see, there's a gap between all the cells. Now I want to change this one to 50 pixel, the middle one to auto, and the other one to 100 pixel. Now as you can see, both these sizes are static and changed. And if I grow and shrink the size of the browser or page, the middle column, because it's used auto as its size, will change automatically and grow and shrink correspondent to the size of the page. So what if I use 2 auto keyword like this? Now first of all, we assigned 50 pixel and 100 pixel to the first and last rows, and the remain space assigned to 2 other columns with the same portion. For example, if I save this, now I have 4 columns. If I try to grow this page, you can see that second and third column will grow and shrink automatically, and I just have 2 rows. First row was filled, and the second one only has 2 cells. And this is the usage of auto keyword, and we can use it to dynamically respond to the size changing event of our pages, and it's a very good approach. On the other hand, we can use percent or percentage as the width of some columns. What does it mean? It means that I can use, for example, I want to assign 20% of the whole page width or whole container width to the first column, and then 30% to the second column, and for example 40% to the third column. So I have just 3 columns with the same with a specified width as the with a specified width. So if I grow the size of the page, you can see they will automatically resize corresponding to the size of the page, and also there's a small amount of extra space remain at the end, because if you just sum up this portion 20 to 30 to 40, it comes to for example 90%, and just 10% of the page will remain unallocated. This is the 10% of the pages. And this is the other way that we can just define our columns. The other options are min content and max content. I can declare two columns. For example, I just want to use max content and max content, and then I will change this one to, for example, sample. So I have only two columns because I use two max content here, and then it takes as much as a space to wrap this word, because this is the longest one for the first column. Let's save and see the result. If I save this, you can see this column area is much wider than this one, because in this one we have only one letter or one digit, and here we have a sample word, so it needs much more space. And this is the way that we can use max content to allocate space to our grid cells. Another function that is widely used in this attribute is repeat function. For example, imagine that I want three columns with a width of 100 pixel. So I can use this notation: 100 pixel, 100 pixel, 100 pixel. So this works for me, and nothing strange happened. But what if I want 10 columns with the specified size? Using this way, it's somehow a tedious task and also error-prone one, so we change things a lot. I can just use repeat function, and I tell I want 3 columns, and every column width is just 1, or change it to see the result, 80 pixel. If I saved it, you can see I just have 3 columns with the specified width. Or you can use, for example, 3 auto columns, and it will generate the same result if I use 3 auto words beside each other. Now you can see if I grow and shrink, every columns also change respectively. So this is the functionality of repeat function, and we can use it through any mechanism that I want to use. For example, I just want 3 20% columns. That you can see there's a lot of space at the end of the grid container. Another function that we can use for our grid template columns is min-max function. What does it do? Using min-max, we should provide 2 values, minimum and maximum, and the browser will consider them as a range and try to allocate a space in that range from minimum to the maximum one based on the available space on the screen. For example, I said for the first column I want at least 100 pixel and at most 200 pixel. And take care, if the mean value is greater than the max value, it's completely ignored, and that value always used as the base value. Now I said this is the first column. For the second one I use 50 pixel, and for the third one I use 70 pixel. So what's the result? As you can see, it said that if you have a space, try to allocate me something between 100 and 200, and for those 2 columns, just static values assigned. So if I just try to shrink the size of the page, as you can see, those 2 are the same, but the first one will shrink automatically when it gets to 100 pixel, and after that, as you can see, this is where we get to 100 pixel, and then because it's reached its minimum size, content go out through the scene, and a horizontal scroll bar appear here. But what if I grow it? First column grows till it get to 200 pixel, and after that nothing happened because it reached the maximum size. So I can repeat it. Also, I can combine it with repeat function. For example, I need 3 columns with 100 and 150 pixels, and just it. Let's close the parentheses and get rid of those. So I have 3 same columns. If I try to grow and shrink, you can see all of them will grow and shrink respectively. And if I have much more space than 100 pixels for any of them, then extra space will be appear at the end of the container. You can see it. And when they get to their minimum size, if I try to shrink the page much more, then extra elements get out of the scene and horizontal scroll bar appears. Also, I can use min-max with different metrics. For example, I just want to have a range of 100 to 150 pixels for the first column, and for those other columns I use 1fr as one fraction. It means that try to allocate space between 100 and 150 pixels for the first column, and the remaining and the remaining space should be divided into 2 equal parts, and each one assigned to second and third columns. So let's save, and you can see the result. Here I can guess that if I grow it, you can see this column gets its highest value, 150 pixels, and then if I grow the window, third and second and third columns will grow. And if I try to shrink the page, as you can see, nothing happened till this part, when sample just get fit to the space, and then the second column will shrink, and now the first one will shrink. What if I change it to this one, for example, 200 pixels and 250 pixels? Let's grow it a little bit more, and I will save it. Now, as you can see, I have much more space on the first column, and if I try to grow now, it gets it to 250 pixels, so these 2 columns will grow. But if I try to shrink, this time sample occupies the whole area, and then the second column gets to shrink, and then when I get here, because I reached the least or the minimum size for this column, things change and content get out of the screen. Okay, this is because I choose 200 pixels as the minimum size for the first columns. Or you can use percentage here. For example, first column should have 20% to 50% size of the page, and then the other the extra space should be allocated to third and second and third columns. So if I just expand, you can see there are expanded correspondingly half of a space allocated to first column, and the other half divided into two same portion and assigned to second and third columns. But if I change it to 2FR, for example, for the third one, now you can see the remaining space after allocating 50% of the space to the first column, then it divided to 3 parts, 2 parts for the third column and 1 part for the second one. And we can do the same for grid rows. There's another attribute called grid template rows. And as you can see, repeat function is the default snippet for that, but I don't want it. I just want to use the entering each row's specification independently. So I can use this one. For example, for the first row, I need to occupy 25% of the grid, and for the next one, I just want to use auto keyboard. Now let's assign some height for the grid. This is 200 pixels, and then if I save the changes, you can see that the first row occupies 1/4 of the grid and the rest assigned to the second row. So if I change it to, for example, 50% and I saved it, you can see there are a little bit space at the end of the grid. It's because I just only assigned 75% of whole grid to the rows, and that's the result. Now imagine that we're going to create this grid. As you can see, sizes for each row and columns are specified, and also there's an index explained here. Each line in the grid can be referenced using a positive or negative index. The first line, for example, this is first line, second line for row, third line, and fourth. And if you use negative index, it means that we want to refer the line from the last to the first. And as you can see, this is also for column lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and -1, -2 to -6. And also we can attach some labels to each line, and this is much more applicable to our grids that we created. Let's check another photo about it. This is same as previous. Instead of that, here we attach some labels to each line. Now I want to create the same grid in the picture using our codes. First of all, I need to declare some columns and also some rows with this specified metrics. For example, 40 pixels for the first column, 50 pixels for the second, and auto for the third column, and etc. Now let's comment out these two lines. So I need to create another grid template columns. So I don't need repeat function. For the first column, I use 40 pixel. For the second one, 50 pixel, 50 pixel, and then auto for the third column, then 50 pixel again for the fourth column, and 40 pixel for the fifth columns. The same for row grid template rows. It's gonna 25% for the first row, 100 pixel for the second row, and auto for the third rows. As you can see, some how it's equal to that we saw on the picture. Let's check it one more time. This is it. So how we can assign label to those lines? For this purpose, we can add label in brackets. Before every size that we want to specify, we can open and close a bracket and then specify the name for that line. This is for the first line. So let's check it one more time. This is for the column. So this is first, line 2, line 3, call 4 dash start, 5, and end. I want to do it respectively. So this gonna be first, and there's no need to put it inside a quotation or double quotation and any other stuff. For the second line, we have line 2. For the third line, it's line 3, and we will use these labels in future. And this is called 4 dash start. For the fifth one, I use 5, and for the last one, we can use end. And I will do the same for the rows. For the first line in row, we have a row dash 1, row 1 dash start. For the second line, we have a row 1 dash end. For the third line, we have third dash line, and also for the end, last line, we have last dash line. So using these two attributes with these values, we can create this picture as our grid system. we want to declare some name for our lines, for example here, it said call for dash start. It's also the end of column 3, so we can attach more than one name to each line. To do that, we can easily, for example here, set that row 1 dash end. I can put a space and then row 2 dash start. And both labels will refer to the same line. It's usable when you want to work with columns instead of a row 1 dash end and row 2 dash end. You can use row 2 dash start and row 2 dash end to specifically refer to the row 2 or cell in located in the second row, and you can use it. And what if we use this notation? Let's comment it out. Oh no. What if I set grid template columns and then use repeat function? Then I set 3. I need 20 pixel columns, and also attach a name, for example call dash start. This is a general name. I saved it. In practice, it creates something like that for me. Create grid template columns, 20 pixel, call dash start, 20 pixel, call dash start, and 20 pixel, call dash start. So how can I refer to each line? They all have the same name. In this situation, you can easily use indexes to refer to those columns. I mean that you can use this line, something like that, call dash, when you want to use it, and we will use it very soon, call dash start, and then the index, for example 2. This is the first one, this is the second one, and this is the third one. Now it refers to the second call start line. And then for more emphasis, let's comment it out. When we have something like this, for example grid template columns, and you just specify one fraction for the first column, 50 pixel for the second one fraction for the third one, and one fraction for the last column. Here we just specify the static values. We assign 50 pixel to the second column, and then if we don't have any static parameter, we just allocate 1/3 of extra space to each column, first column, third, and fourth. So first of all, we allocate static ones, and then we calculate the remainder, and then divide it by the total number of fractions, and assign each column its portion. The next concept I want to cover is grid areas. Grid areas is something like that. We have a couple of rows and columns, and I just said all cells in the first rows are named, or is an area named header. The two first cells in the second row is for the main area, and then I have an empty part. It's not belong to any area. The sidebar is just the one cell on the last cell on the second row, and all cells in the third row belongs to footer area. So how I can declare an area? To declare an area, we have a property here. Okay, now let's comment these two lines and also get rid of this one. So I want to declare something like that. We saw in the picture. I need a grid with 4 columns and 3 rows. So first of all, I'm gonna add grid template columns, repeat 4 columns, and I choose auto for their size, and then for grid template rows I use auto. And there's another shortened way to specify these values, and I will cover it very soon. Now if I saved it, you can see now I have only 2 rows. So I use grid template areas. With this property, I can assign a label to each cell using some string values. So I start to put some double quotations, and now I explicitly tell every cell what's your name or what your area is. For the first row, we have them all in the header section. So I just put 4 header value. Each one is for one cell. For the second row, I just go to the next line and say first 2 lines are belong to the main area, and then I have an empty cell. It belongs to nowhere. So I just can put dot or period. Period says that this cell is an empty and it's not belong to any area. And then I have sidebar. And for the third row, we have again 4 footer value. Now I specify the areas. How can I? And as you can see, because I just use 3 different string lines, here I have 3 different lines. So I want to, the first item in HTML occupy all the header parts. How can I do it? Imagine I will declare a class with item-header. Now in this class I use grid area, and I said you should be put throughout the header section, just the name I used here. Now if I go to HTML file, and in addition to item class, I assign item-header class to the first item. If I saved it, you can see one or first cell goes throughout the first row entirely, and the other elements will be placed on the next rows. And for example, if I want to just put 4 in the footer, I can assign it another class, item-footer, and then go declare it dot item-footer, and then grid area for this item is footer. Now you can see 4 occupies all the footer part. Or if I change it to sidebar, you can see 4 get to the sidebar, and the other item place based on the order or predefined order. We can change it also, and I will talk about it in the final section of this tutorial. So if I choose main, 4 occupies 2 first cell in the second row. And there's also one important thing with the areas. When we declare areas in this way, we don't specify any name for lines. In this approach, the first line here will be named as header start, and this line is header end, and also this part is header main start, and this part is main end, and this line is sidebar start, sidebar end, and etc. This is a naming convention when you use areas in your grid. We will use grid lines for assigning cells or distributing cells throughout the grid very soon, and you can see how these names play a role in placement of object or placement of elements inside the grid. The next things that I want to talk about is gap. We already saw gap, and what if I want to specify gap for items in column and rows separately? Let's check it. Let's comment it out and also get rid of these areas and remove these 2 classes again. Okay. Now I want to specify a gap only for columns, not for rows. You can use grid. Let's check it. We have a deprecated one and a new one, grid column gap. As you can see, grid column gap is somehow deprecated, and it said just use column gap instead. So column gap. If I used it, I just assign 5 pixels. So you can see in between each column, I have 5 pixels of gaps. And we have the same one for row. We can use grid row gap, and it's also duplicated and said just use row dash gap. So I use row dash gap, and I assigned 10 pixels for gaps between rows. As you can see, the gap between rows are twice more than the gap between columns, and this is obvious because I chose 10 here. Now we can combine these two into one property, shorthand property, and it's called gap. In the previous one, it was grid gap, and now, as you can see, it's also deprecated, and instead just use gap. So we can use gap. If I provide one value, it use it for both columns and rows. If I choose 15 pixel, let's come to that. Now we can see gaps between rows and columns are the same. But what if I just provide two values? The first one used for row gap and the second one used for column gap. And this is all about the gaps that you can use to put some space between your cells. Next thing is how we can justify elements inside the cell. As you can see, my elements occupy all the space in the cell. So we can change it. We have two different properties for this one: justify items and align items. Each one works for one direction. For example, let's use justify. Justify items. It tells us how should I align or place the element from the row point of view. I can use start. It says that just use the start part of the cell to put your element. If I saved it, you can see all the content stick to the start of the cells. I can change it to the end, and then all the elements just stick to the end of the cell, and if any extra space available, just appear in the start of the cell. You can use center, so it gets centered in the cell, and also stretch, the default behavior. It says I'm gonna stretch through the cell. The other property is align items. Instead of a stretch item, I'm just gonna use align items. And it said how should I place the item vertically. The previous one was horizontally, and this said how should I place items vertically. So I can use the start, the same as before. As you can see, cells just occupy the start of the cell height with their real height. You can also use end here. It stick to the end of the cell height. And then center, just place in the middle of the cell and occupy some match or some precise height. And the last one is a stretch. It's the default behavior, and said occupy as much as you can to fill the cell. Also, there's another value for this property. It said baseline. What does baseline really do? A baseline. Let's create another class, item dash baseline, and in this one I want to just change the line height, for example, to 50 pixel. The height of each line for the div that has this class should be 50 pixel. Let's change this one to a stretch. I saved it and I assigned it to the second div, item dash baseline. If I saved it, you can see because of the line height change, 2 appears in another format, and it comes a little bit down than the other. So if I use baseline here, it said that all the text in the same row should be aligned somehow to appear there on the same line. If I saved it, you can see these are now on the same line, but this one has some greater line height. If I just remove the background, you can see it seems that all of them are on the same line. This is how baseline works. Now let's get rid of this one, or get rid of this one. I don't need it. And then change, and also bring the background back and change it to stretch. There's also another shortened property that we can use, like gap, for justify items and and align items. It's place items. So we can provide one value or two value for this property. If we just provide one value, it's used for both justify items and align items. If I just set it to end, you can see it goes to the bottom of the cell and to the right hand or to the end of the cell, stick to the end. But I can also provide two value. First one is used for align item and the second one is used for justify. Now I said go to the bottom of the cell and stick to the start of the cell, and this is applied to all the cells inside the grid. We can do it separately for each cell, and I will talk about it very soon. In addition to justify items, align items, and place items that talks about inner HTML inside the cells, we have another attributes that talk about whole grid. Let's check an image to get it more clear. Here we have a container and a grid item or grid content here. As you can see, content is smaller than the container. So we can align the content of the grid. Imagine the grid as an entity that we want to align it, not each cell dependently. We are talking about the grid as one object. So let's do something here. I just wanna I just want to use repeat for this one, 2 parts, and for each row I need 50 pixel. And let's get rid of these gaps. So this is and also let's assign 50 pixel for the columns. So here you can see I have a grid that occupies a portion of the container. So using justify content, I can specify how this grid should be aligned in the container. So justify content. So the default value is a start. I can use end for that. As you can see, the grid stick to the end of the container, and the extra space will appear in the start of the container. So I can use and this is using justify content. We said how to align items horizontally, not vertically, just like justify items for cells. And then I have a center. You can put it in the center of the container horizontally. Let's add 2 more item here. 6, 7, 8, and then change it to 3 also. So this is a complete grid. And then I can use a stretch also, but a stretch won't work because when we use a stretch, we set start from the beginning of the container and try to occupy the container space. So because I said I just only need 4 columns with 50 pixel and 2 columns with 50 pixel, 2 rows with 50 pixel height, we explicitly specified the size, so it cannot be stretched. What if I just set auto for the rows? As you can see, it stretched out through the container height, and if I change it to auto, it is stretched out through the container width. So let's change it back. And stretch won't work when we specify the size explicitly. There are also another variables that we can use. But if I use a space around between and evenly, a space around said that there are some extra space available in the container. Just try to put it around all the columns. So if I used it, you can see some space, some extra space here, some extra here, 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 and here. And as it's obvious, the space between the columns are twice more than the space in the start and end of the container. Because what? For each column, we have a space before and after, before and after. So in this part, we have two spaces, one before this part and one after this column. But for this part and this part, we just only have one portion of those space. What's about the space evenly? It said that just calculate the extra amount of space and divide it into 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 part, and put it just around, or it's better to set around the items. One before this one, one before this one, one before this one, one before this one, and one after, or at the end of the container. What if a space between? A space between said that stick the first column to the start and stick the last column to the end of the container, and then put extra space between the items remained. So if I saved it, you can see that it sticks to the start and to the end, and we have 3 extra space here that divided equally and put before the second and third columns. And we have the same property for vertical alignment. It said align content. So let's check this also. For align content, we can use the same values. For example, the default one is a start. We can use end. So stick the content to the bottom of the container. Center is obvious. Center and stretch is obvious, just like before. We said centralize vertically the grid in the container. A space around and a space between and a space evenly also available here. A space around said that just put a space around the rows, not columns. Okay. A space between is somehow tricky here because we just have 2 rows. First row stick to the top of the container, and the second row stick to the bottom of the container. Extra space will remain between these 2 rows, and because we have no other rows, so all the extra space put between. What if I set it to 3 rows and 3 rows and 3 columns? You can see these 2 are as before. They stick to the top and bottom, and 1 row available in the middle. So a space, extra space put inside this area, and before and after this row. So let's change it back. And a space evenly is the same. Space evenly. It said that put a space evenly before and after and in the middle of all the rows. And also we have a shortened property named what? Yes, you guessed it right. Place content. Place content is a shortened property for both justify content and align content. If I provide one parameter, it applied to both justify and align content. If I saved it, you can see I have the grid in the middle of the container. But if I just provide 2 items, the first one applied for align content, and the second one applied to justify content. If I used end, you can see I'm in the center vertically and stick to the right side of the container horizontally. Now let's check how we can use grid lines or grid line labels to place items in the grid. So first of all, let's get rid of these templates. I want this one back. So why? And also I don't need to get with the place content. So what is happening here? Yeah, I have 3 rows. So as you may remember, this is our default layout we created before. Now I want to place just one item occupy all this cell, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. So I can use it, or I can declare a new class and set how an item should be placed in the grid. I just want to use these lines. For example, I can use a line indexes. This is line 1, line 2 for the column view, I said. Or even I can use these names. Let's check it out. And I just want to comment all of these. And I have only one cell. So here I am going to declare class item 1. Now here I can use 4 different properties: grid column start and grid column end, and respectively grid row start and grid row end, to specify the range of columns and rows this cell should occupy. So for start, I use the index. I set second line, and for end, grid column end, I use 5. I said it should occupy till the line 5. And then for row, grid row start, I said it's start with row 1 dash start, and for grid row end, I said it goes to line 3. Let's check it one more time. It start from line 2, line 1, line 2. I start from here till the line labeled 5, till this one. So these 3 columns will be occupied. And for rows, I said row 1 start till the line number 3. Start here, 1, 2, 3, till this one. So this area will be occupied. If I save, nothing happened because I didn't assign item 1 class to this div. So you can see all the area occupied, all the area that I want. Now let's check another one. Let's check this photo with each other. Here I want another item to occupy this part. Now I want to use a span. I just define or specify the start of the column and rows, and then using a span keyword and set how many rows or how many columns should be involved in our placement. So here I just comment this and uncomment div2, and I just assign item to class to this one. I will declare it here. Let's copy this item and add it here. So this is item to class. So the column start is from line 1, and it is span 1 through 3 columns. So I said start is 1, and span, and then a space, and then the number of columns. I said 3. So you can see it just occupied 3 cells. And for row, we can just set, you can start from row 2, the second row, and span 2 other track. So if I save it, you can see it started from line 1, line 2, and span it 2 other track, to line track. And also we can specify grid line name here. For example, I said span through call start, call for start, call for start. It has the same result. If I change it to 5, it goes 1 columns further. And if I set something that it couldn't find, it occupies the total area, because it goes to find something named 5.1 and nothing happened, and in this part the container ends. So if we specify something that is not exist in the naming system, or even an irrelevant index, it will occupy the rest of space that it can find. Another we have also shortened for these 2 properties. Let's check another picture. But before that, let's change it to call for that start, and also uncomment the first line. As you and let's change the background of this one, background to yellow, yellow green. As you can see, we have two different items that have some cells in common. You can use Z order to change their top level. For example, I said Z order, Z dash order, Z dash index. Okay, and change it to positive number, such as, for example, 2. Now, as you can see, the first item bring to the top, and the second one goes backward. So we can use that index to control how common items show in their screen. Now let's check for the shorten property. I want to place third div in these two columns on the third rows. So I have 1, 2, 3, line number 3, and it spans over 2 track, and also it starts from third line to the line number 4. Let's do it. So I'm gonna declare a new class .item3. Here the shorten property for grid column start and grid column end is just grid column. Now we specify the first the column, the start column, and then a slash, and then the end column. So for this purpose, I used third as the start, and then a slash. I said you should span to grid track, and then for the grid row start and grid row end, we have a shorten property called grid row. The start is third line, third dash line, and then you should go to the line with the index of 4. Now let's comment out these two lines and just uncomment div 3 and add comment here. If I saved it and add item 3 class to this one, you can see this occupies 2 cells in the third rows, and this is the shorten property for these two, and this is the shorten property for grid row start and end. This is the start part slash end part. We've already checked grid area attribute, but we can use grid area as a shorten for these two property also. Imagine that we want to have something like this. The fourth div in our container should occupy these 2 columns and entire rows. How can we do it? You may be able to do using this property, but we want to use grid area attribute, and then also we're going to define grid areas in the container and check it using that way. So let's just comment this one again and uncomment this one and add these 3 to comment. So we have just 4 as the only cell in the grid. Now I just want to add another class here, .item4. So using grid area, we can also define a property for this picture. As you can see, this is start from line 1 for the row, and also call for dash start for the column. So we specify the start row and then a start column, and then we should have a end row, this is last line, and the index or the name of the last column line. So this is something like this: row start, column start, row end, and column end. So let's add value. So we said that we want to start from the first line, use the index, and from call for dash start, we use any combination that you are comfortable with. I just use a combination of all the things that we declared and also indexes. Go to last dash line and to the line with number 5, and add this to item 4 So something went wrong last line. And I call for that to start. And again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Go to line 6. Now, as you can see, this element occupies the last 2 columns with all rows. So how can we do it without this convention? And I just want to name the columns in the container and use the text here. So let's comment it out. There's nothing here. I just want to name this one to the sidebar. So in each row, we have 3 different rows. The first 3 cells are not important now. So here I'm gonna add grid template area. So for the rest row, I have 3 period and then side. And this will be repeated for the next 2 rows. Now I can just assign the grid area with the name side. As you can see, the result is the same. 2 last columns and all rows occupied for this HTML element. Now, if they are the same, but it's rare, we can just repeat 3 of this item. Let's comment it out, and now it's not working. For grid areas, we should specify them explicitly. So this is how we use grid area with this notation and with this notation. The next things I'm gonna check is how to align a specified item, a specified element inside a cell. We just check how justify justify items works, but it's work for all cells. I just need to assign it to specified cells. So let's uncomment all of these HTMLs, and I don't need these classes anymore. I just need a simple grid. This one is a simple grid that I have. And also let's get rid of these 2 and get them back. So it's just an ordinary grid for something. Okay, let's get rid of this one. No, this is an ordinary grid I have. So I want to align, for example, item number 4 independently to the whole grid. So what does it mean? Let's do it for item 5. I create another class, item 5. And here we have another attribute set, justify self, align self, and place self. So with justify self, I'm going to tell how this specific element should be aligned inside its cell. So I said and then assign this class to this item 5, to this element. Now, as you can see, item 5 is stick to the right side of the cells, because I said it justify works for horizontal alignment. We can set it center. It goes to the center of the cell, and stretch is the default value. Start is the default behavior. And also I have align self, that is somehow can be aligned item placement from the vertical point of view. If I set to the end, you can see it is stick to the start of the cell and bottom of the cell also. And there's also another shorten, its names place self. This is the shorten property for these 2, and I can set end for both. If I saved, it will change the position of 5 to this part. So this is the result, and you can also change the values independently. This one goes for align self and this one goes for justify self. This is how we can justify an individual element inside a grid without affecting the other cells. Now let's get back to container and get rid of this class for item 5. We have a shortened property to specify grid template columns, grid template rows, and grid template areas at the same time, and it calls grid template. Grid template. Where's it? Grid template. Using grid template, I can define rows and columns and also areas in different manners, but this is the most useful one, and it's used widely. For this one, first we are going to declare rows and areas simultaneously, and then using a slash we define columns. So when we want to define rows, we just start for the we should define each rows independently if we want. This is a start line caption, and then any area that we want, A1, A2, A3, and then the size, how we want to size it, and then the end line caption. This is the format that we should use. So imagine that I want to use a 2-line grid that with 4 columns. The columns in the first row all belongs to an area named header, and the columns in the second row all belongs to an area named footer, and I need to just add a row 1 dash start and row 1 dash end for the line of first row, and row 2 dash start and dash end for the second row's line caption, and then use 25 pixel for both as their height. So it's something like this: row 1 dash start, and then there are 4 cells in each row, and it's 25 pixel height, and then it has the same name, row 1 dash end, and then I can repeat it for the second row. It comes to row 2. These are footer, footer. It's 25 pixel height, and row 2 end. So what's about the columns? For columns, we already know that we have 4 different columns, so we can just size them. Imagine that I want to second and third line have a static widths of 50 and 100 pixel, and those the first and last columns should be auto as their width. So this is auto by 50 pixel, 100 pixel, and auto. And now if I saved it, it seems that nothing changed. So let's see. Okay, we have it overrides the previous one, so I comment it out. Now let's add some gap 2 pixel. Now as you can see, this cell occupies twice more space than this one, and these 2 are auto values, so I can resize the preview paint in order to see the result, and also nothing, it's just done, and it's equal to something like this one. Let's do it using separate attribute. I use this one for grid template rows, grid template columns, grid template rows. Also has something like this: row 1 dash start, 25 pixel, row 1 dash end, row 2 dash start, 25 pixel, row 2 dash end, and then we should use grid template areas explicitly. This is header, 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 and footer, 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 footer. And these are both the same, but I prefer it much more, and it's your choice to choose which one. Next, I want to talk about grid auto columns and auto rows. So what are those attributes? Imagine that we have initial setup for a grid like this, 2 columns and 2 rows. Columns are 60 pixel width and rows are 90 pixel height. Now we want to add something, or we have to add something out of these 2 cells. We want to add something on the 2nd row and on the 5th column. There's no 5th column in the initial setup that we had here. So if we didn't specify grid auto columns or grid auto rows, these 2 extra cells added with the width of 0, and that maybe cause us some problems. But if we define grid auto columns or auto rows, we can specify how implicit or auto-generated columns should be look like. And that's going to be something like this. If I specify the grid auto columns, then implicit columns are getting 60 pixel width also, and this is the result. So let's check it in practice. First of all, let's comment this grid template and add 2 static values for grid columns and grid rows. Grid template columns, I want 2 columns with widths of 60 pixel for each one, 60 pixel, 60 pixel, and then grid template row, and not repeat, 90 pixel, or I can use repeat. Oh, let's get 90 pixel, 90 pixel. Okay, this is my new template. Now I just want to have just 2 items based on what we saw in the picture, item 1 and item 5. Item 1 should be placed in the first column of 2nd row. So let's add this for item 5. Let's add another thing for item 1. Item 1 dot item 1. I think we have no item 1. Grid column. It started from first line to 2nd line, and for grid row, it should be placed on the 2nd line. Start with 2nd line and goes to 3rd line. I saved it and also add this class to item 1. You can see item 1 placed here. Now, what about item 5? I want to put it somewhere out of the grid specification or grid columns. So I'm gonna comment this one and add. Let's copy these 2. Okay, I will say that you're gonna start from line 5 to line 6 and also line 2 to line 3 for row. And let's add this one to the item 5 class, save, and I'm going to save it. Now, as you can see, it's stick to the end of the grid because it's somewhere out of the grid, and even if I grow the grid, you can see there's a cell on the outside the grid and it occupies extra space out there. But what if I determine grid auto columns in the container? I just come here and add grid auto columns and set each extra column or implicit column should be should have 60 pixel width. Now if I save, you can see it only occupies 60 width for this column, and there are 2 other columns here. But if I just try to grow and shrink, nothing happened. It just occupies the specified amount here. Let's change it to, for example, 90 pixel. And as you can see, it occupies much more space than the columns here, and if I just grow and shrink, nothing happen except when it goes to the end of the content, it gets out of the scene. Okay, and this is how we can use predefined values for implicit columns. Next, and in fact last attribute we're going to learn in this video is grid autoflow. Grid autoflow is the way that we can tell the browser placement algorithm how to place items in the grid cells. What does it mean? Let's look at this picture. In this picture, with regarding these two elements, item -A and item -E, that placed on the first and last column and occupies 2 rows, we have 6 other empty cells. And using grid autoflow, we tell the browser how to place item inside these empty cells. By default, it uses a row order basis. It means that it starts from the first row and try to put items in the cells respectively. Item B in this cell, and next one, and next one. And if there's no cells in the first row, it goes to the second row. And we can change it to, for example, column basis. In this picture, we can see the column basis, item B in the first empty cell in the first column, and then item C just put in that column, not in on the next column, in that column and next rows. And then when there's no cell in the current columns, we go to next columns. And there's another way to put items we're going to talk about. This is somehow like RAM allocation in the OS. When one program wants to start, it requests for some memory, and OS using some algorithms such as a first fit, next fit, or best fit tries to find the best space in the RAM and allocate to that program. If you're familiar with OS, you maybe hear about those algorithms. And this attribute, grid autoflow, works the same. Now let's check it in practice. First, we need 5 different elements. So let's get to index.html and try to uncomment 5 elements. Now we have 5 different elements. Let's change grid columns to, I need 5 columns and 2 rows. So I use repeat 5, and each one 50 pixel columns. And then for rows, that's good, 2 rows, and I don't need grid out columns anymore. Now for item 1.1, I just wanted to be in the first column and span over 2 rows, so I can easily change it this way. And let's check the let's change the background color to, for example, yellow. And for item 5, I'm gonna put it in the 5th column, and also span over 2 rows, and change also the background to, for example, blue. And let's change it to 5.1FR, and also I need some gap 2 pixel. And also for rows, let's do it 1FR. Okay, this is the same as the first picture. You have it here. Now, in order to change the placement algorithm, we can just use an attribute set grid autoflow, and change it to column. Now, if I saved it, you can see 2, 3, and then 4. We are going to put element in the column basis. And what if I have another element? Let's uncomment it, and you can see this one goes here. Now I want to change the default order to row. As you can see, 2, 3, 4 are on the first row, and 6 goes to the next row. Now I want to change 4 to span over 2 columns. So I can easily come here. Let's see if we have item. Yeah, we have item 4. And I want to say that grid column to auto and span over 2 rows. This auto goes for row, and this goes for columns. By the way, I recorded this part of the video and I don't know why I deleted mistakenly. So I recorded one more time, and these two attributes are from the previous record here. Now I'm gonna assign this item 4 to this one. And in item 4, if I saved it, because there's no more room here, 4 goes to the second row. Let's save it. And as you can see, 4 now is here with the 6. They are both on the second row. One more option we can use here instead of row and columns. Where is it? Yeah, it's dense. With dense, we said that okay, you have no more room for item 4, so you want to push it to next row, but you have empty cell here. If there's any other element, you can put it here. So if I changed it, 6 goes up because I have empty room, and using the tens for grid auto follow, we're going to fill columns if there's any further elements on the other rows. Let's save it. Now we can see 6 goes up because I used dense. This is somehow like row, but we're going to fill any rows and then with any other elements on the other rows. This is the main difference with the rows. This is dense. So this is all about grid layout in CSS, and I hope you enjoyed. This is a lengthy video, but I try to do my best in this video. I hope you enjoy it. For next tutorials, I'm going to create some videos about how to create dashboard pages, especially responsive one, using HTML and CSS, and maybe add some functionalities using JavaScript. I'm not going to use any third-party libraries such as Bootstrap and Tailwind or some other ones to add style to our pages. We're going to create everything from scratch, so we can see the process of creating nice look and feel dashboard pages that you may have wondered before how this page is created. And if you know the basics, especially grid layout and Flexbox, you can do a lot of things about layouting those pages easily. So I hope you subscribe my channel and tell me your feedback about this video and also those videos that I will upload in future. Till the next videos, goodbye.